Hey, hello. Welcome to my premium deck profile for BCS France. This is the Magus deck, Oracle Think Tank Magus. I use this to basically bubble into ninth place, so my tiebreaker was just a little bit off. I was kind of hoping to see if I could maybe make the first place, just because it would be funny considering the Italy prize, because I won Italy. Basically, instead of giving you a trip to LA, it's more like they tell you. Obviously, they don't exactly say these words, but it feels almost like telling you, okay, well done, you've won Italy, now go win France if you actually want that trip to LA. Obviously, before the pandemic, it would have been if you want that trip to Japan, then you have to go win London. So it does seem a bit ridiculous, and I just thought it'd be funny to kind of take on the challenge. Obviously, though, just a little bit off, but I kind of decided to just play this last minute, not super last minute, but more like I think days before the event. I thought I feel like playing Magus instead, and then the actual list I changed it like in the morning of the event, so just a few card difference. But unfortunately, I did forget some other cards at home, so I didn't even get a chance to consider some other cards that I could maybe have played instead. So one of the things I've changed actually was instead of Lozenge Magus, I played Semi Luna as a starter. I was actually main decking this card, but I was having some issues right before, and in some of my test games I was getting grade stuck, and I was just getting so frustrated, so I decided to just down my main deck grade zeros and have more ones and twos. Uh, you know how it is with experiences when you play these games and you have these sort of bad luck moments or something, and then it's just like, wow, this is annoying. So suddenly now you just don't want to play any more extra grade threes or grade zeros or something. It's sort of that kind of thing. So that's the starter. It doesn't matter if you go first or second because you're plussing two either way with this, because what it does is when you boost and you have a Maker's Vanguard, you have to declare the top card of your deck, and if it's the one you declare, you soul charge this in and then you draw two. It's awkward because if you're boosting and swinging, so like say your opponent's playing a 10k force deck, which is actually kind of one of the reasons why this card hasn't aged as well as ideally, because of force decks. So a lot of decks now that people are playing have 10k bases. One of which is the Steam Maiden deck in premium format, which is one of the tricky decks I was having difficulty with when testing, and that was again quite close to the event. And in the actual tournament itself, I played against two Steam Maiden decks as well, one of which I lost to, and the other one I was really close to losing. So there was quite a bit of luck that helped me in that, and by luck I mean getting the overtrigger. But this card, it's it's good for swinging if your opponent's maybe a grade behind you, assuming they're playing a force deck. But then once they're the same grade or greater than you, then if you use a skill against a 9k attacker, then what happens is you succeed, you draw two, but then you just don't hit. And then it just means Entrana and whoever can just keep on plussing without ever having to drop anything to guard, which is kind of annoying. And usually you just lose the grade 2 game because of that. So that's the starting Vanguard. Next we play 4 copies of 4 Pentagonal Magus. You can actually play hexagonal. There's not really that much of a difference. So I was a bit biased. I wanted to play the Wilds promo because I have 4 copies of it. But really, they have different uses. Hexagonal Magus is good in general. If you have the CB to pay, you can just use it and look at top 2, filter, draw, stack a trigger. That's a pretty good on-ride skill. It can also gain 5k as a rear guard, or I think even as a Vanguard as well actually. You can gain 5k just for drive chicken trigger. This card on the other hand, basically when you drive chicken trigger while having this as your Vanguard, the trigger gains 5k power, so actually it's not fixed to the hexagonal magus, for example, or rectangle where they only power themselves up. This card passes the 5k with the trigger, but it's different to Hex Orb Sorceress, where Hex Orb Sorceress gives 10k when you get triggered to any rear guard. Whereas this card, it's basically powering up your trigger, so you can't spread power with it. It's going to be 15k exactly to one unit, or 10k if you're playing the old triggers. So it's an okay skill, but then pretty useful for the second skill actually, because that's how you can build more numbers, which is when she attacks Soul Blast a grade 3, and you discard 3 cards. Well, basically it's 5, but you minus 1 for every rear guard Magus in the front row. So really it's 3 in this deck usually. And what then happens is that you get the extra drive checks, so you gain 3 drives, so it becomes 5 drive checks, and that's pretty handy because with some of the cards, we've got a card that can basically put grade 3s into soul, so you can use this on turn 3. It's quite difficult though because it's a bit of setup, and I'll get to that soon, but already you have to discard 3 from hand as you're attacking, while planning to try and get 5 units ray guards on the field, and I'll get to that bit in a moment as well. So it's quite nice a skill, but while it's quite aggressive, it's also very dodgy in terms of reliability. And then next we have Facility Magus. This is the more reliable card. Count +1, Soul +1, 10k, and drive check to your Vanguard. So you always get this off, more or less, as long as you've got the Count Plus pay, which is not that hard. So useful, best card in the deck, probably. Well, definitely the best grade 3 in Magus. And what you can also do with this is that when you've got your Pentagonal Magus, let's just say you pull that off, you can go from 5 to 6, 7, 8 drives. This is a grade 3 that you quite often will soul charge in with the next card that we'll go into, which is Cubic Magus. And her skill is that when you attack with her at the end of battle, you can count +1 and restand her, but you have to have an entire field of Magus, so you have to have 6 Magus units, including Vanguard. That's handy, but if your opponent plays a field disruption deck, then it's a bit of a problem. And also, if you're trying to do turn 3 Pentagonal Magus combos with Cubic Magus for the full power, it gets a bit iffy because it really depends on your hand, like quite a bit. Like it can whiff, so sometimes you might just want a grade 2 game, and then once you meet the conditions and you're ready to go Pentagon, then it's all good. I did have difficulties though against Steam Maidens in testing and in the tournament games, because the problem is you've got cards like Entrana and the Cat, which can basically filter very hard for good defensive cards, so they can find PGs and heals, whatever, very easily, which then kind of makes this punishing high roll play against an opponent that grade stalls not be as effective as you'd have liked to. So you lose a grade 2 game and your opponent usually has defense to not have to drop anything that good against you. So it does seem to have a bit of a questionable matchup against Steam Maiden. But the bit about moving grade 3s to Soul, which you can do to trigger Pentagonal, which often you'd usually put Facility because you'd use her skills as a rear guard, then shove her in and then do the thing. You can put Pentagonal as well if you want to save this. To be fair, you're not going to use this card so many times in the game, Facility Magus, because eventually you're going to run out of resource or run out of deck size. So, and you will draw into more copies anyway. But basically, Cubic Magus, she can soul charge a unit that's Magus into your soul. So from your field to soul. That's obviously Magus specific, because if you want to use some sort of generic good Oracle Think Tank card and then just neg off the board so you can still try and clear it for the Magus condition of the restand, you can't really do it that way. You're going to go for that hard neg because she doesn't let you soul charge anything you want. And then what you do is you look at the top 2 cards of your deck, and then you can put them on the top of your deck in any order, and then you draw a card. So basically it's like Rectangle Magus, it's like Hexagonal Magus, pretty generic. It's a free check top 2 to draw 1 and stack. Obviously you're negging 1, but it's decent cost because it helps you rearrange your field and also put grade 3s in soul. So very useful card. Now against any sort of field disruption deck, obviously Cubic Magus does suffer because you lose one of your Maguses, then your restand combo is just gone, utterly gone. So be careful of that. We do play the Ichikishima G unit for the reason. At least you can stop the G guards when you do reach that, because obviously there's cards like Pandora Chimera, for example, in Gear Chronicle to look out for. Next we have Rectangle Magus, 4 copies. So this is a good early game card. You can stack triggers potentially and draw while at it. Also gains 5k, so you can hit better numbers, especially against force decks that have 10k bases, because we do struggle against those. Again, Steam Maiden's a good example of one of the most popular decks of the season right now that you'd like to have the skill against. So very good for that matchup. Then we have 3 copies of Stellar Magus. So Stellar Magus is more or less the ideal ride because you don't really want to ride anything else. She can basically reveal, so she helps to enable your Semi-Lunar by looking at top card of your deck. Also, if you fail, you can just countercharge back as well, which is quite nice. The other thing is that if you use cards like Cure Magus, for example, you could potentially just see a non-trigger and then just draw that with Stellar, and then leave that trigger to then get used in the drive check. And other things you could also do is you could just randomly guess. Maybe you could just guess something you happen to need at some given time. If you get it, you get it. If you don't, then you don't. But then you can plan your damage check knowing the top card. It's sort of like the old school Globe Magus combo when You just end your turn and then you decide, okay, well, I know what the next card is, so I just play around with what's on the top of my deck. You could also use her that way as well. And then next we have 4 Tetramagus. So this is a really good card. Only problem is you have to be on grade 3 to actually be able to use it, grade 3 or greater. So obviously in the early game you can't plus with this. It's just sitting there in your hand until you decide to ride up to grade 3. What you can do is you can draw a card for CB1. In my opinion, this is actually suddenly now one of the best counterblast to draw cards that you could possibly play, because at the moment, counterblast to draw now is just not that special anymore. And normally you want to be able to do more now with the counterblast, because there's just so much stuff you want in this format. But you have ways of countercharging back, and also this deck rewards you for filling up your field as much as you can because of Pentagonal Magus and Cubic Magus combos. So Tetra helps with that to meet those conditions. So you're basically counterblasting to build up card economy, but if you want to use the crit on top skill, you can also do that. You can put the crit from your hand on top of your deck, and then you have your more reliable critical trigger to then go into as well. That's if you can afford it, of course, with your hand. Or if you think there's a chance that you might be able to clean the game out, then you could do that too. So Tetramagus is pretty good for that. Makes you feel like you're actually playing more criticals as well, which is nice, because one of Oracle Think Tank's biggest problems is that criticals, they can run out, so this can kind of help you get around that as well. Cure Magus, so this helps you with revealing. You're actually looking at 2 cards and rearranging them. So Semi-Lunar Magus, you could basically play around Semi-Lunar with this as well. You could also use Stellar Magus with it as well, just as I mentioned earlier. It's very handy for that. You can also do the Tetramagus Cure Magus combo, where you can put the crit as a second card and use Tetramagus to draw the next card, which is a normal unit. And then you can place, if you want to, a crit on top as well to guarantee triple crit, which is the kind of classic play that this card was sort of made for. You can also set up damage checks as well with this in the early game. Next we have 4 copies of Cone Magus. So Cone Magus is really, really good. It's a G-set 5 card. It's like Zinc. Please don't ban this. So what it does is when you place it, you reveal the top card of your deck. If it's the one you declared, then you countercharge 2. So you're building up a board to try and get your full field of Magus, but then you're also able to countercharge while at it, which then helps you to enable more counterblast to draw cards, such as Rectangle Magus or Tetramagus. So really handy in general. Next, and also just to bear in mind, you are revealing, so this is another Semi-Lunar enabler, so you can use a starter as well from turn 1. Now, the other cards we play are Rollox. This is one of the changes I made as well in the morning, and this is really helpful because in the early game, if you decide to greed to game, you might need to access some good defensive cards, and generally you'd rather play pure Magus as much as you can, but this is a decent card to play if you don't want to play a Magus in your main slots. I didn't have that many options in terms of what cards I could run because I forgot a lot of my stuff at home, so I just went with this option mainly. Next I play 1 copy of Elementaria Sanctitude. This is basically just the perfect card. It's quite easy to fit into this list. And then of course for the trigger lineup I play the other 3 Sentinel crits as well, because we have Protect Gift as well, which kind of makes it okay. But also again against decks like Steam Maidens and other decks as well that are roaming around right now, like Grand Blue for example with Bartholomew, basically the Battle Door type of skills where you drop 2 or 3 cards from hand to guard are really annoying, and they do devastate these sort of decks, especially Oracle Think Tank, where they really need the hand pieces and they really need the hand stars to meet, you know, Momo's discard cost or Ichikishima's Oracle condition as well. So being able to drop less cards to guard every time is really helpful and can make the difference between you being able to play back in the opponent's next turn. In your next turn. And then we play the drive check over trigger, because this deck has Cubic Magus, and restyling that with the over trigger power is really funny, but also being able to drive check while at it. If you happen to also have a grade 3 rear guard in front row for Silly Magus, for example, then you get an extra drive as well. But the restand is also getting you the 2 drives total from Cubic Magus, which is pretty good as well. So this is really nice when you pull it off. It's Oracle Think Tank. You do pull the over trigger quite easily in this deck. Actually, like a fair amount of your games you will see the over trigger. And we also have Dragon King as well, which is actually one of the ways that I won against Steam and won the games. Was basically I pulled the over trigger, I think, off the Dragon King, and that gave me the 100 million to Cubic as well. But I think I also did that in like maybe one of my other games as well. I think it was against Grand Blue. Yeah, Grand Blue I think it was. That was the game that I lost, one of the 2 games I lost. But it was more just a case of my opponent had the 4 perfect guards in hand, so I couldn't get through. Then here we've got 4 Celestial Witch Toto. So this is the Strider crit. This obviously helps you to stride, that's why you play it. And then we've got 4 copies of Psychic Bird. I don't really want to play too many of the old triggers because the trigger powers do matter when it comes to Cubic Magus, since Cubic Magus is only 9k base. And if you go into a card like Ichikishima, there's less ways of you being able to give power to your rearguard. So usually you do want your triggers to be able to give you more power, and Psychic Bird is the one that we're kind of letting go with a bit. So this is the kind of one that I'm setting as a 5k only, but I did want to play Paisley Magus, but I'm not going to because of the need for high power triggers. And then 4 heal trigger grade 3s as well. You can't search for grade 3 heals in this deck, there's no grade 3 searches, but still you do draw quite a bit, and being able to see this could help you survive if your opponent high rolls you, or if you want to play the grade 2 game and try and win that. And then of course saving cards in hand is always good because it's Oracle Think Tank. And then onto the G Zone, we play 4 copies of Ichikishima. So Ichikishima is not actually the main stride, not by a long shot. So this deck is actually quite good in that, unlike a lot of other Oracle Think Tank decks that you may be familiar with, there are a few decks which I'd say Magus and Witches, which rely on Ichikishima the least because they have re-standers or re-riders. And that's a bit of a big deal because the problem with Oracle Think Tank's clan design has been that ever since Ichikishima, we reached a point where into the V series, we started relying on rear guards that have guard restrict, and they synergized with Ichikishima. So we had V Silent Tom, we had Divina Yachimita Hiko, we've had Brilliant Witch Popo, we've even had Balsas Trifle as well. So the problem with these cards is that when you've got this as your main finisher, it means you rely way too much on Ichikishima, which then means the other strides don't really do as much as a result. Now this deck, it doesn't really matter if you go into Ichikishima because giving 30,000 to a restanding rearguard in Cubic Magus with Momo, or getting more triggers off of Dragon King and even be able to replenish your board and then swinging twice with it, these are the kind of the ways in which you're still able to put pressure no matter which G unit you go into, and your opponent is guarding, but then they still have to guard regardless in the following turn, which then means that you're basically putting actual pressure on the opponent now, rather than just saying can you guard or can you not guard. And if they survived and then you can't Ichikishima them anymore, then they just go back to being able to use all those cards that you've denied them from using, which then means you're far behind and then you're just going to deck out. So it's really helpful that this deck doesn't rely so much on Ichikishima anymore. She's mainly there because you want to deal with the Narukami matchup in particular, or any sort of decks that have G guards that can ruin your field, because you still need to have a full field of Magus. And then here we've got 2 copies of Momo. You know what, I actually kind of feel like Cubic Magus, maybe they should just made the card require, if you started your battle phase maybe with 6 Maguses, then that way we don't have to worry so much about G guards disrupting it. So the thing is with the Momos is that you've got restanding Vanguard, but now you've got also restanding Rearguard. So you're basically doing kind of similar to my Regalia deck, where you've got the restanding Vanguard and restanding Rearguard if you use 2 Norns and a CEO Yggdrasil. So it's a bit like that. And also Mono can gain more drive checks. This sort of does similar things combined with Facility Magus. So it's a bit similar to my Regalia deck, the way it plays. And then being able to give your front row 30 key power is also kind of interesting. And it's not a force 2 deck, but you can try and find criticals with it. So it's definitely decent at making progress. You don't necessarily win. Like, it may sound strong, but these days there are a lot of ways to defend now in Vanguard. So surviving multiple attacks, like 4 big bulky attacks, isn't really as difficult. Especially if your opponent knows how to keep the damage low, then it's a lot harder as well. You may notice this isn't even playing Amaterasus either. So because of that, Momo is generally a risky card, because while you can try and steal games occasionally, the problem is with Momo trying to steal games that if you fail to, and don't forget damage over triggers can now exist, which can also ruin your entire turn. The problem is you're discarding 3 cards and you're only getting 1 drive, so you're basically negging 2. And obviously with other units or other boss cards, you can basically be plussing instead of doing neg 2. So obviously your card economy takes a bit of a hit. The way you try to offset that is with Facility Magus, which is exclusive only to the Magus deck, which is one of the ways in which you make Momo feel like a better card. There are obviously other decks that can make Momo feel not too bad, like for example Bow Sisters with Fromage's on place draw 2. So Momo is kind of a risky card, but you can make it less risky in this list so that it becomes more of a reliable first stride to use. And also we've got Dragon King, so use this more so when you're lacking cards to play with. So if you don't see Fossilies and Cubics, then, or if you just don't have enough Magus units, then this is your main card to go into. So it's not as strong as a Momo turn, but it can still do things by the end of it, so that's really good as well. And then after that we have Kamo Susano. He's just there for hand recovery, especially more controlled kind of hand recovery, because Dragon King in the late game, this could forcefully deck you out because you have to basically get out more cards. And Kamo Susano can also just run with a 5k and a crit, which could potentially seal deal the game as well, depending on what your opponent's hand is like. Then we've got 2 copies of Amaterasu, the G Guardian. So this is a free 25k shield while soul charging one, and also stack on top of your deck without revealing that card to your opponent, which is also really nice. So sometimes you just don't have the Counterblast. You may not have seen Cone Magus in that game, for example, or maybe you just want to save your Counterblast for another G-Guard or some other play as well, especially into your next turn. Or maybe you just don't think it's worth going for the smaller shields that the other G-Guards give you, and you just want one big shield for that attack instead. Maybe you're just worried about some sort of battledore skill that would otherwise force you to drop more cards. There's all kinds of different reasons why you'd go into this. So it's a very helpful card. And then we also have 2 copies of Bavros, because this is also an easy card to use. Sometimes you can get that bonus 5k, which is becoming easier now because of grade 3 heal triggers counting as, you know, towards the conditions of gaining 5. So now you've only got like 12 misses in this deck. And if you play Stellar Magus, you can also maybe get an idea of what the next card in your draw is. So that can be useful with a card like Octagonal Magus, which doesn't actually do the reveal as a second card in, but does reveal on the first card. So if you Stellar Magus and you return, just like the old school Globe Magus combo, you can then know the top card of your deck, which then helps with Octagonal Magus because you can declare the grade. And if it's a grade you declared, which you'll get right, then you'll get the 15k shield and you'll draw the card as well. And that's really nice to have. Globe Magus back in the day used to be used with Octagon Magus as well to also gain the become a 15k shield. So it's quite similar. You can use this blindly as well. So for example, if you absolutely need that 15k shield, but you also need more cards in hand, you can gamble and try to go for the draw. Obviously you can fail, it can happen. You can try and take calculated risk as well at times. So you may decide, okay, well I don't know what top card it is, but you might decide to declare grade 1 and 2. The reason why is because the top card, if it's a grade 3 or grade 0 would be a damage trigger that you can potentially damage check into, or if it's grade 3, then hopefully it's a grade 3 heal. And if it's any of those, then it just means that you're making the worst case scenario less likely, so you'll just have like an okay solution either end. But then if you see like a normal unit grade 3, then that kind of sucks, I guess. And then next we have Lozenge Magus Apex. So this is a Counterblast 1 look at top 2. You basically add one to hand and put it on the bottom, so you're giving yourself a choice of 2 cards. So sometimes damage checking isn't the direction you want to go for, or revealing top cards even. Maybe the direction you just want is simply a 15k shield and an extra card in hand, and this is the best way of doing it, which is with Apex. And then next we have Dismal. So Dismal is good because he can protect your Cubic Magus. It's just basically as simple as that. So that's more or less it with the Pentagonal Magus deck profile. So yeah, let me know how you find it. It's a bit of a fun deck. I did do a lot better, I guess, than I should have expected. Bubbling 9th place is not too bad for a deck that I've hardly played in, well, with anyone really, except for a few games of testing beforehand. So yeah, I guess look forward to any other deck profiles that I do, and until then I will see you guys later. Goodbye.